going on, guys? I'm Joe, and today I'm here to do a video that I have been wanting to do for quite a long time, since I saw it 5 years ago. A review / defense of The Dark Knight Rises. Yes! Some of you may know this, some of you may not if you're new to my channel. I did do a video on this before, last year with 22 Tiger Dude, a podcast of sorts. We were doing a series of Batman videos leading up to Dawn of Justice. And in that video, I tried to address some of the criticisms that I've heard over the past few years since its release. And don't worry, I'm not going to take it down. If you want to give it a watch, it's there on my channel if you want to check it out. But I didn't really have enough time to go full in depth with it because I had to work it that day. So here, in this video, I'm going to try to address the criticisms that I've heard over the last few years, but also to talk about why I think this movie is very underrated and a lot better than I think people have given it credit for in the last few years. For those of you who may or may not know, Batman is my second favorite superhero besides Spider-Man. I'm not like very well versed in the Batman comics or Batman lore altogether, but I have a pretty good idea of what the character is supposed to be. A rich billionaire who has a hatred for injustice because of what happened to his parents at a young age, and a lot of the psychological torment that the Joker puts on Batman and various other things. Besides the Dark Knight trilogy, I love the Batman Arkham game series. That I think is a really awesome series. I've seen a little bit of the animated series from the 90s. I didn't grow up with it, and I like some of the straight to DVD or in certain cases Blu-ray releases of the Batman films, the animated films. In fact, I finally got Mask of the Phantasm on Blu-ray. I'm going to be talking about that very soon with my good friend Rachel Wagner. So Rachel, if you're watching this, don't worry, I still got it in mind. So let me know when you're ready. I have a couple of Batman shirts, including this one, as you saw in the intro. And I listened to the soundtrack for Batman, at least the Hans Zimmer music for Batman, particularly Molasses, which sometimes I admit I listen to when I drive on the highway. Not a good idea. And also, I'm planning on doing a character study video on Christian Bale's portrayal of Bruce Wayne. I can't say exactly when that's going to be, but keep your eyes open for any kind of updates. So you can always follow me on my Facebook page, my Twitter page, and so on. Let's talk about The Dark Knight Rises. I love the first two films, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. I've done videos on those two also, but if you're wondering if I'm going to do a video on any of those again, like a review, probably not. Maybe Batman Begins, but The Dark Knight, that's a tough one, because what else can I say about that movie that hasn't already been said? The movie speaks for itself. There's no need to talk about it. At least I don't think there is. The Dark Knight Rises was 4 years after The Dark Knight, as far as release-wise, and a lot of people were really hyping this up. Me, I was a little bit sad, since Heath Ledger sadly passed away, that he was not going to be coming back as the Joker. So I wondered, it's not going to be the same without Heath Ledger, because who are they going to pick to be the main villain? There was a lot of rumors that Edward Nygma, the Riddler, would show up, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, since he was in the movie Inception by Chris Nolan, and I wouldn't have minded seeing that, but in the end, I was happy with the villain that we got in Bane, played by Tom Hardy. We'll talk about him in a little bit. And when they announced the plot and who the characters were going to be in this one, at first I thought, well, alright, we'll see what happens. And that first teaser came out, I thought, okay. But then the second one came out, and after it I went, I have to see this. And then as more trailers came out, I was getting more and more pumped, and I was unbelievably hyped. This is one of those movies where I was really hyping up, along with Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3, and even The Force Awakens a couple of years ago. So after the success of The Dark Knight, I think a lot of people, myself included, watching those trailers, at least for me, were beyond excited. We could not wait for this movie to come out. And I saw this movie 4 times in theaters. I'm not kidding. That was how excited I was. It was the second film I saw multiple times in theaters, after Spider-Man 2 and then The Force Awakens, which I saw 5 times. And at first this movie was met with a lot of praise and cautious praise, I would say. It's got an 87% positive rating on Rotten Tomatoes last time I checked. But over the years, a lot of people have come out and said that this movie isn't really that good, or it's just a huge disappointment. And the whole plot holes argument's been addressed many, many times, and I'll get into some of them, but probably not all of them, because I don't want to spend like 5 hours talking about this. And I would watch it off and on over the years, because Chris Nolan's movies, you have to get into a certain mindset when you watch them. They're very dense. So I watched this movie recently, and I still don't understand why people think this is terrible, because I actually think this is a really, really good movie, and I'll explain why, because I think this movie is nowhere near as bad as people make it out to be. Now, after the success of The Dark Knight, Chris Nolan and the rest of his team had a bit of a challenge on their hands. How are you going to follow up on The Dark Knight's success after Heath Ledger and those famous lines, those famous moments, all that stuff? It was never going to be easy following up after that, because it was like it peaked, and where else can you go after you hit your high? And even though he had written a general story storyline for each film in the past, he wasn't really sure if he was going to come back and do a sequel, but because Batman Begins was so popular, people wanted to see more, and Heath Ledger's performance, of course, as the Joker made it a huge hit, amongst other things. But I've heard him say that he was worried he was going to get bored halfway through the film, thinking that maybe I shouldn't come back, I don't know if I could touch this again. And some people argue that that's what he did, he just kind of half-assed it. I strongly disagree with that. I think he and the team devised the best way possible to conclude this series because he literally said many times in various interviews, this is the ending of our story. We're not expanding on anything. This is not going to be a shared universe or anything like that. We're going to conclude Bruce Wayne's story in this trilogy. And watching this movie 5 years later, I found it very refreshing to see a film that was not so focused on setting up future sequels or leaving certain things open. Even though it does leave certain things open for possible future installments, we all know in the long run that wasn't going to happen. But it was more focused on telling its own story while leaving certain things open for what could possibly happen in the future with certain characters. And now that we live in a world where we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the X-Men films, the DC Cinematic Universe. I like the Marvel films most of the time. Even once in a while, they have a problem of relying too much on setting up future installments. This movie I found very refreshing in that there was really no need to expand the story in the long run. This film takes place about 8 years after the events of The Dark Knight. Harvey Dent is now looked up to as a hero by the city of Gotham. Crime is at an all-time low, and everything seems relatively calm on the surface. But of course, that peacetime is about to be interrupted when Bane and the League of Shadows show up on the scene to complete Ra's al Ghul's mission, and Batman once again has to come out of hiding in order to stop him. Now the film opens up in some undisclosed location. I'm guessing it's in Central Asia, like in Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan, Russia, I don't know, with a CIA operative picking up at least 3 people on his plane, interrogating them about Bane, and he discovers that one of the 3 men, who has a knapsack on their head if you will, turns out to be Bane. And Bane is played by Tom Hardy, and where you see his full mask. And hearing his voice for the first time and seeing him unmasked with the big grill on his face, even watching it now you're like, okay, that guy is a monster. And sure enough, he is. And it turns out being caught was part of his plan. And another plane shows up, a C-130 comes in with all these other guys rappelling out of the plane onto the one that Bane is on. And they pull him out of there along with the doctor. And this whole sequence, along with Hans Zimmer's music, which throughout this trilogy, consistently awesome. I don't know how else to describe it. It's riveting. And Nolan uses a lot of practical shots in here. I've seen the behind the scenes footage where he was flying in a helicopter, getting the shots of the planes. People are actually rappelling on the ropes onto the plane. It's insane that the amount of work that he and his production team put into this. And it's also with the scene where you see just how determined Bane is to complete his mission and how scary he is. And the voice. A lot of people had problems with the voice when the IMAX preview came out, and I didn't watch it at that point, but watching it about a couple months ago, hearing the comparisons and how it sounded then and how it sounds now in the final cut, I thought, yeah, sounds a lot better in the final edition. So Bane and his men escape with Dr. Pavel onto the C-130. Then it transitions to Gotham City, where they celebrate Harvey Dent Day on the day that he died, at Bruce Wayne's mansion. The mayor gives a speech, Commissioner Gordon shows up, prepared to give the speech, revealing the truth about Harvey's actions, but then he decides maybe the time isn't right. And you see Bruce Wayne's silhouette on the rooftop, and immediately they set up the fact that he hasn't really been seen in quite some time, along with the housemaids that are helping out for the event at Bruce Wayne's mansion. Bruce Wayne is basically a recluse, and when Selena Kyle brings him dinner and sneaks into his room and literally scares the ever-living out of her with that arrow, and it scares me too every time I watch it.
Sorry.
Then you see Bruce Wayne in his robe, on a cane, with a full beard and longer hair, and this broken look on his face. And watching this movie now, seeing his situation, I felt so terrible for him. I'm like, oh, you poor guy. But then as it turns out, the maid, Selena Kyle, stole Bruce Wayne's mother's pearls from his safe. She knocks him to the ground, and she jumps out the window, and she takes a ride with this congressman that was hanging out with Deputy Commissioner Foley at the party. Now, since I mentioned Selena Kyle, let's talk a little bit about Anne Hathaway. I've always liked Anne Hathaway, ever since Princess Diaries. I don't know how people feel about that movie, really. I thought it was pretty good. Nothing too bad. It was harmless. And when they announced that she was going to be in this film, I thought, ooh, nice. For some reason, a lot of people hate Anne Hathaway, and I can't wrap my brain around that. I don't know why, but that's a different conversation. I was really interested in seeing who she was going to play. But when they announced her to be Catwoman, I thought, really? Seems like a strange choice. Catwoman, in general, has been known to be very sexually attractive, very alluring, and all those kinds of things. When I think of Anne Hathaway, I mean, not to say that she's not attractive or anything, but when you look at Anne Hathaway, I think she's a very beautiful lady, but not in the kind of way that I would picture Catwoman to be. I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt going in, and when she first shows up in the movie, she's all shy and timid. Oh, excuse me, sir, would you like some shrimp balls? Seeing how shy and timid she is when she first sees Bruce Wayne, before she lets her true nature come out. Watching it for the first time, I thought, alright, am I gonna buy this? And the moment when she goes,
oops. Nobody told me it was uncrackable.
And then when she knocks Bruce Wayne to the ground, and she jumps out the window, that's where I said, any and all doubts are now gone. She is absolutely perfect as Catwoman. And it's here you're also introduced to other characters like John Blake, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Miranda Tate, played by Marion Cotillard, who immediately you're like, something's off about that woman. And we'll talk about the twist later on, but Marion Cotillard, she's very good at playing a femme fatale, I guess is the word. I'm not sure, but you gotta give credit where it's due, and the way she plays that character in Inception, she's doing something right. But it's here with Selina Kyle that actually encourages Bruce Wayne to do something that he hasn't really done in quite a long time. At this point, after 8 years, he hasn't done anything to try to find a life of his own or try to move on from being Batman. He actually goes into the Batcave to investigate where Selina Kyle took his mother's pearls. Does quite a few detective work as well, because that's one thing that I hear a lot of people complain about this series. A lot of people don't seem to like how Bruce Wayne in this series is not so much emphasized as a detective. Now, it's a similar thing with Peter Parker in the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, not building the web shooter. They want to see visually how he's able to create all this stuff. I get those complaints, and when you adapt a comic book character, you're gonna make some changes in order to make it stand out from others. But similar to Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, how we learned about his intelligence through dialogue exchanges, it's a similar thing in this one. Mostly in this one. The first one, he was just starting out. The second one is where you see him actually visually investigating something. But in this one, it's similar, as I said, with Tobey Maguire. You learn about his detective skills through subtle dialogue exchanges with other characters like Alfred or even Lucius Fox in the previous one. Yeah, it would be cool to see something like the Batman Arkham games, like with the crime scene recreation and play-by-play. But looking at it from a realistic standpoint, I don't think it would have quite worked. I mean, we have technology today that can recreate something like that, but it's still in the early stages from what I understand, so I think if you tried to do that, probably wouldn't have translated well. Like Bane having a breathing mask instead of the Venom, I'll address that later, but I'm okay with it in this one because I think they made a conscious decision to make Bruce Wayne a more grounded and realistic character in this version than he usually is in other films, because he's portrayed to be a very cynical kind of person with some heart underneath, but he's very cynical and doesn't really have a sense of humor. This one, he still has some of those qualities where he has a dark and brooding and damaged nature underneath him, but he's portrayed as a more normal person. Personally, I'm okay with that. I have no problems with that whatsoever, and I think Christian Bale kills it every single time. He's not glamorous about it, like look at me, or anything like that. But anyway, he's investigating where the pearls were taken. Alfred finally voices his frustration with him, and it leads to Alfred telling Bruce this fantasy that he would have. When Bruce Wayne was away for 7 years, Alfred would take a vacation to Florence in Italy, and there's this little cafe somewhere in Florence, and he would imagine that he would look across the tables and see Bruce Wayne with a wife or maybe a couple of kids.
You wouldn't say anything to me, nor me to you. But we both know that you'd made it.
And it's in this scene when Alfred says, I had this fantasy that I'd look across the tables. It looks like he's gonna cry, and I cry at least 3 times in this whole film. This is the first time where I literally start to choke up, and it's all a credit to Michael Caine. Nobody beats Michael Caine as Alfred, and you can see the pain in Alfred's eyes. He cares so much about Bruce Wayne. He's practically raised this guy ever since Bruce's parents were killed that night. He loves him like a son, and it's exactly how it should be between Bruce and Alfred. I buy the father-son dynamic between these two. And that brings me to one of the points that I want to address. A lot of people think that Bruce Wayne gave up being Batman simply because he lost Rachel. Actually, he doesn't. He says in his secret meeting with Commissioner Gordon in the hospital that the Batman wasn't needed anymore. We won. Bruce Wayne never intended to be Batman for his entire life. At some point, he knew he was going to have to give this up. He used Batman as a way to inspire other people in Gotham City in order to rise up against the crime bosses in Gotham City and various other criminals to take the city back. And as it's revealed throughout the movie that Bruce Wayne did try to find some kind of purpose afterwards by creating a fusion energy project for Wayne Enterprises, which is what Bane uses to try to destroy the city later on. And Bruce was trying to use it as a way to give power to the city of Gotham, and he was also funding various boys' homes throughout Gotham City as well. But when he realized that that fusion reactor could be used as a weapon if someone bad out there got their hands on it, he decided to cancel the project altogether because he couldn't take that risk. And then once that happened, he couldn't move on because Rachel was gone. She was his only link to a normal life. It might have been a false hope that he was holding on to, but she was his only link to moving on with his life. And now that she's gone, he doesn't feel like he has anything left to live for. But of course, in the long run, Selina Kyle is one of those things that actually inspires him to move forward with his life. But as it turns out, Selina Kyle is working for someone who works at Wayne Enterprises, John Daggett, played by Bill Mendelsohn, who you might know as director Orson Krennic from Star Wars Rogue One. And just like in Rogue One, he's, for lack of better words, a douchebag. Literally. And I'm surprised that Darth Vader never said, "Do you feel in charge?" when he tried to choke him out. Anyway, this is the plot point of the movie that I find a little hard to follow. I think I get the point, but it's done in a way where you can't quite understand it unless you really think about it or pay attention. At least that's how it works for me. She's trying to get Bruce Wayne's fingerprints and give them to Daggett, which later in the long run, with Bane's attack on the stock exchange, Bruce Wayne loses all of his wealth. I'm guessing she used his fingerprints to gain access to certain parts of his company that Daggett could get his hands on in order to take all of Bruce Wayne's money away. That's how I think it was done, but they do it in a way where it's like, huh? What? It's a nitpick, but still, it's like, I think you could have cleaned that up a little bit. But she's also using it to get a fresh start in life. She's a cat burglar of sorts, trying to get her way from her miserable life in Gotham City. And in the comics, from what I understand, Catwoman is obviously a cat burglar. And a lot of people don't seem to like how she doesn't have the traditional look. This is portrayed more realistically because she has goggles, and when they go up, it looks like cat ears, basically. And yeah, she's not called Catwoman, but she is referred to as a cat burglar in the newspaper headline that Bruce Wayne looks up on his computer in the Batcave. Again, they portray it in a way of what would these characters be like in real life. And I find it perfectly believable, to be honest. And it also makes sense as to why Catwoman doesn't look absolutely stunningly gorgeous in this film. Anne Hathaway, once again, is a very beautiful lady, but not absolutely knock your socks off type of gorgeous, if you know what I mean. It's a realistic portrayal of the character. But her character also plays into something that I think this film does a really good job with, and that is rising up, or finding redemption in some way. The title of this movie basically says it all. The Dark Knight Rises. Rising out of the pit of your own darkness, whatever that darkness might be. The three main characters and the city of Gotham are trying to find a way to pull themselves out of the pits that they're in. And even though Gotham seems fine on the surface, the evil is still very much present. Maybe not in the same way that someone like Sal Maroni or Carmine Falcone were in. This is a different kind of organized crime. White-collar crime. All it needed was for Bane to come in and pull the pin on the grenade and reveal the fact that it's still there under the surface. And Selina brings it up in the masquerade party that she's at with Bruce Wayne shows up to, as they're slow dancing in a similar fashion that Michael Keaton and Michelle Pfeiffer were doing in Returns. You sound like you're looking forward to it. I'm adaptable. But it's also this scene here where she lumps Bruce Wayne together with the other rich people in Gotham. Similar to Rachel, she misinterprets him and thinks of him as something that he really isn't underneath. And she proves to be wrong later on in Bane and Batman's first encounter. But they have common interests with each other because they both come from troubled pasts, and she may be a poor person and he's a rich person. We all know the saying, opposites attract, right? And when she kisses him, she leaves, and Bruce Wayne, after coming out of his home for the first time, turns out his car, his Lamborghini, was stolen by Selina Kyle.
Must have lost my ticket.
Your wife said you were taking a cab home.
My wife?
And since I mentioned that's his first time in 8 years that he's come out in public, the start of that is the character of John Blake, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. John Blake is a police officer in the Gotham City Police Department, and he's very idealistic and is a believer in truth, justice, and the American way and all that kind of stuff. He's eager to do the right thing, no matter what it takes. He even goes out of his way to find Commissioner Gordon when he's kidnapped by Bane's henchmen in the alleyway shootout scene. And once he hears from Gordon what's going on down below with Bane and his army, John Blake decides to go to Bruce Wayne and tell him what's happening. And it turns out, John Blake knows Bruce's secret. This is something that a lot of people were like, wait a minute, how does he know that he's Batman? And admittedly, it took me a couple of viewings to actually understand how he was able to figure it out, and also reading other articles online trying to piece it together, because like I said, Nolan's movies are very dense. But when you break it down, it actually makes a lot of sense. And real quick, when I first saw this, he needs you. He needs the Batman. Oh, he doesn't know or care who you are. Immediately, I'm sitting there like this. huh? And he talks about his childhood, how he was an orphan, his mom died in a car accident, his father was shot over a gambling debt, which he remembered, and he felt a lot of anger about it as he was growing up. Raised by foster parents for a little while until they kicked him out to a boys' home after he couldn't control his anger. And he also goes on how he figured it out too late, and that he had to learn how to hide the anger, practice smiling in front of a mirror, like putting on a mask. And then one day, when Bruce Wayne showed up, after he came back after 7 years, showed up at John Blake's orphanage, everybody was excited to see him, a billionaire orphan. And when he says, "But right when I saw you, I knew who you really were."
I'd seen that look on your face before. It's the same one I taught myself.
After being away for 7 years, Bruce Wayne comes back to Gotham, and then not too long after, Batman shows up on the scene. So any normal person in Gotham City would have been like, okay, someone with deep pockets would be able to acquire that kind of tech. So could Bruce Wayne and Batman be the same person? But then when you see him act so carelessly arrogant in public, dating all these women, going out to these fancy restaurants in this fancy car and all that stuff, people would be like, no, he's not Batman, he can't be. But the fact that John Blake was able to figure out his secret was because both him and Bruce Wayne come from similar backgrounds. They're both orphans, they experienced anger at a very young age, and in their own different ways, they had to learn how to hide the anger deep down. In layman's terms, it takes one to know one. Some people write this whole point off as a plot hole, but literally, when you break it down, it actually makes perfect sense. And he also inspires Bruce Wayne to come out of his house by saying that I'm still a believer in the Batman, even if you're not. And he also tells him that the money stopped being sent to boys' homes throughout the city because of it being stopped by Wayne Enterprises. So that's one of those other things that causes Bruce Wayne to finally come out of hiding. He slowly starts to rise up throughout this film as it goes along. And he also pays a visit to Wayne Enterprises, meeting Lucius Fox, played by Morgan Freeman. And other people have said this before, but I love Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox. The scenes that he has with Bruce Wayne, they're perfect. Similar to Alfred and Bruce Wayne, they're like the comic relief of the series. It's that much needed humor that is required for this series, for this character especially. Bruce Wayne, as I live and breathe. What brings you out of cryo sleep today, Mr. Wayne? I see you haven't lost your sense of humor, even though you had lost most of my money. Actually, you did that. And I also like how in the second and third film, Lucius knows Bruce's secret. Because in the first one, when he was making all those odd requests, like, I want to borrow it for spelunking, and even Fox was like, you expecting to run into a lot of gunfire in these caves? It's like one of those things, like a need-to-know basis. Like, yeah, I know what you do, you know I know what you do, we'll leave it at that, and I will help you out in any way I can. And sooner or later, he had to have figured out what was going on, and I like how he actually is part of Bruce Wayne's crime crusade, that he actually does help him out with the knowledge of his secret. And he shows him a new piece of equipment, the Bat, or in this case, the Batwing in Nolan's version. And then later on, Bane and his goons show up, causing a raid on the stock exchange at Gotham City, and Bruce Wayne finally comes out of hiding as Batman. And I have to say, the whole reveal of Batman coming back when they're in the underground tunnel, it's awesome. And this part has always made me laugh.
Sorry.
The look that Batman has on his face, like he's saying, really? Really, dude? And because Batman shows up, the cops get wind of this, and they all start to chase him through the streets. Batman gets his hand on one of the guys that was working for Bane, gets a hold of this tablet, and all of a sudden the cops surround him on the highway. But he manages to get away thanks to a big rig truck that's laying nearby. And he goes into one of his secret hideouts in an alleyway and gets in the Bat and takes off. Basically, it's a callback to the police chase in Batman Begins. Not quite as exciting, but the musical score by Hans Zimmer also kind of elevates it for me. And more or less recycled, yeah, but it's still as exciting and bombastic as it'll ever be. But it's also in this scene with Deputy Commissioner Foley. That character I do not care about in the slightest. I mean, when I heard that Matthew Modine was going to be in this film, I thought, oh, cool, yeah, Private Joker from Full Metal Jacket. Very interesting how he plays a guy named Private Joker in Full Metal Jacket. Get it? Well, anyway, I'm going to do what Jim Corden never could. What's that? I'm going to take down the Batman. Congratulations. I don't think he's awful in this movie, but his character is just, he's just there. I don't really need to see him in this film. They try to give him an arc in some way, but really, he has nothing to him, so he didn't need to be in here. I'm sorry, Mr. Modine. But during the chase, Catwoman breaks into the safe at John Daggett's place, and she corners him, and she escapes with him out onto this nearby roof, since she didn't find what she was looking for, a fresh start, which basically means that he screwed her, just like he screwed Bruce Wayne. Then they all corner her on the rooftop, and she holds him at gunpoint. Stay back. I'm not bluffing. They know. They just don't care. and a fight ensues with Catwoman and Batman fighting off John Daggett's thugs. Catwoman pulls a gun on one of the guys. Batman knocks it out of her hand and kicks someone away, and they say,
You gotta be kidding me.
No guns, no killing.
Where's the fun in that?
once again, a little levity that's required in this film. And I think it's a very faithful recreation of the relationship that Batman has with Catwoman. And then Bane and his guys show up, and Batman says, yeah, not tonight. They both run off, and they take off in the Bat. And I love the look on Anne Hathaway's face as they take off right after Batman says,
This isn't a good.
what the heck is going on? And also one of my favorite lines by Batman in this film. After he asks Selina about Bruce Wayne's fingerprints, and then a helicopter flies by, he turns away, and he looks back, and he goes,
So that's what that feels like.
And just real quick here, that's something that these movies get made fun of a lot for, is Christian Bale's Batman growl, and that it's too cheesy, it's too silly and over the top. I get those complaints, but to be honest, I don't have a problem with the voice at all. Yes, I can joke about it, and I can laugh at some of the jokes that have been made. And I'll bring it up again once I do my Christian Bale Batman character study video in the future. I think it makes more sense for Bruce Wayne to mask his voice when he's Batman, because he's a public figure. If he spoke normally, or with a somewhat normal voice, people would eventually put two and two together, where they would go, he sounds just like Bruce Wayne. I think he is Bruce Wayne. And not to compare or anything, but as much as I like Kevin Conroy, at least I can tell that it's the same person underneath that mask. He has a very slight gruff in his voice. He's got a great Batman voice, don't get me wrong, but you could tell that it's Bruce Wayne. So you need to put some kind of a gruffness to it in order to throw people off. So you can debate about whether it's too much on Christian Bale's part, but in these movies, I don't have a problem with it. I think it works. And after that, Bruce comes back to the Batcave and asks Alfred to get the information to Lucius Fox, but during this point, they are arguing about whether or not Bruce Wayne should have gone out there as Batman. And then it leads to Alfred deciding, no more. I'm going to help you this one time, but that's it. And he even goes as far as to revealing the truth about Rachel choosing Harvey over Bruce in order to try to stop him from going on his crusade again. And this is another thing that I've heard people complain about, that Alfred promised Bruce that he would never give up on him, and that's basically what he did. He broke his promise in this film that he would never give up on Bruce. Well, no, I actually don't think that's the case. I strongly disagree, because he says at least twice in this scene, leaving is the only thing I have left to make you understand. There's a big difference between giving up on someone and taking a stand. As I said earlier, Alfred cares deeply and loves Bruce so much like a son that he's willing to do anything to get him to stop. As he says earlier, before Bruce goes out and stopping Bane, as he's giving information about Bane's past, growing up in a prison, and how he was trained by Ra's al Ghul in the League of Shadows, and then he was excommunicated, and he says, and if anyone is considered too extreme for Ra's al Ghul, he is not to be trifled with. And he also warns them by showing him the security footage of Bane attacking all the armed guards there, showing just how intense he is as a fighter. And Bruce tries to shrug it off. No, I'll fight harder, I'll always have. No, I see the League of Shadows resurgent. And Bruce Wayne doesn't really seem to care about whether he lives or dies anymore, so he's trying to get Bruce to see that he can move on with his life. And when he finally reveals the truth about Rachel, he says, maybe we should all stop trying to have the truth and let it have its day. If Alfred had given up on Bruce, what he would have done would have just stood idly by and continued to enable him. But no, he did not give up on him. He took a stand. There's a big difference between those two, as I said earlier. Even at that, can't you just watch the scene and actually appreciate the emotion that's going on? Because you see how much he cares about Bruce, and this is like the second time that I cry in this movie. Once again, thanks to Michael Caine. He sells his heart out in all three of these movies. Now that I mentioned Bane's backstory growing up in a prison, let's talk about him a little bit. Tom Hardy, I think, is a perfect choice for the character in this film. And there was some controversy surrounding his casting. Bane in the comics is known to be Latino character, comes from a prison in South America somewhere, and Tom Hardy's a white guy. That didn't really sit well with some people. With certain characters, I don't mind them changing the race of said character, because that should not be the defining factor on why we love the character. That should be like a topping, if you will. Not to get too deep into race or anything, but in this film, they did it for a reason, in order to bring it back to a full circle in this series. League of Shadows tried to destroy Gotham, Batman stopped them. Now they've come back to finish the job. And in all honesty, the key points to Bane's character are still there. He grew up in a prison, has no guardians of any kind, and he doesn't really hold that much value in human life. So pretty much all that stuff is still there. I don't really see a big problem with it. And also the fact that he uses a breathing apparatus instead of the venom that he's been known for, which turns him into a really big hulking monster. I hear some people complain about that too. And again, I say, look, you have to look at this from the perspective of Chris Nolan and what he was trying to do in order to adapt it into the world that he set up in the beginning. And he says in the special features for Dark Knight Rises, taking Bane from the comics and putting it into Nolan's world, it wouldn't have worked. It would have been too comic booky. I mean, there's some things throughout this trilogy that are a little bit hokey in some cases because they're comic book movies down in their core. So on some level, you have to suspend your disbelief. You had the microwave emitter and the hallucinogen that Scarecrow was spraying onto his victims, Two-Face getting burned on one side with a big gash in his cheek, and then the breathing apparatus that Bane wears in this movie. There's stuff like that that kind of pushes the realism a little bit, and it's also meant to be kind of unrealistic in some ways. It's a comic book movie, so just roll with it. Like, who cares? And of course the question will come in, well, how does he eat or drink? And that's a good question, but the movie doesn't try to address that, so why should that matter? And as far as the voice goes, I think it's a really cool voice. It's very chilling. It's got a Darth Vader kind of sound to it, but it also kind of sounds like Sean Connery. And my mom and I debate about this all the time. Whenever she sees Tom Hardy in a movie, she immediately goes, oh my god, no, you can't understand anything he says. And because of The Revenant that she holds that opinion of him, I understand him just fine. Minus a few times in The Revenant, but I understand him just fine. In this film, I think he's pretty easy to understand. There's one or two times though where you're like, huh? What? Particularly the scene where he kills Daggett, or as one of my followers describes, he tickles Daggett to death, basically.
Yet to end the borrowed time you've all been living on.
It's that one sentence where I go, huh? What? And since I mentioned that scene, the way he just pops into the scene after Miranda Tate manages to get control of Wayne Enterprises, Daggett is upset that he couldn't take control of Bruce's company. Where the hell is Bane?
Speak of the devil, and he shall appear.
He's got this presence to him, kind of like Darth Vader does, but in a different kind of way because of his muscles. I mean, he had a few mega vitamins, let's be honest. I do not want to cross this guy in any way. It's like, I will do whatever you ask, just please don't kill me. After Daggett yells at him a few times, Bane says to Daggett's associate, leave us. No, stay here. I'm in charge. This is pretty much what my reaction is every time I watch this scene.
Do you feel in charge?
Mother. And then, after they exchange a couple more words, I've paid you a small fortune.
And this gives you power over me?
And then, more or less, like I said with one of my followers, he tickles him to death, and crushing his nose is like,
I'm necessary evil.
that's scary stuff. But then after Bruce leaves Enterprises, he gets a ride from John Blake to Selina Kyle's apartment, and they arrange a meeting between her and Batman, as Bruce Wayne describes a powerful friend, as he mentioned in the ballroom scene. She agrees, and one of my favorite parts is this.
I'm sorry they took all your money.
No, you're not.
Apparently that was ad-libbed by Christian Bale. If so, perfect. Bruce goes home and Talia shows up and they have a nice romantic meeting together. And he sneaks away as Batman and meets with Selina Kyle in the subway tunnel. They both make their way to Bane's hideout in the sewers. But it's also here where Catwoman double-crosses Batman by closing the door between him and her. I had to find a way to stop them from trying to kill me. You made a serious mistake.
But not as serious as yours, I fear. Let's not stand on ceremony here. Mr. Wayne.
And that little look that Selina has on her face when he says Mr. Wayne, that's the start of her character arc and what leads her to helping Bruce later on at the end of the movie. Because up until now, she's written Bruce Wayne off as just another spoiled rich guy, stealing from him and also double-crossing Batman since he believes in fighting injustice and she doesn't really care. But when she finds out that two of those people are the same person, that's what makes her realize the consequences of her actions. And she's watching as this fight scene happens, and at the end of it, she starts backing away like, oh my God, what did I do? And speaking of the fight, this fight scene is brutal. And not in a bloody kind of way, like, say, Spider-Man versus the Green Goblin in the original Spider-Man film. You feel every single punch that's thrown in here, by Bane at least. And Batman has clearly been out of the game for a long time, and as he says, peace has cost you your strength. Victory has defeated you. And Batman's throwing everything at him, and Bane's just standing there, taking a punch like this, and he kicks him away or punches him, whatever. It's like, dude, you are no threat to me. And the fact that there's no music in here actually adds to the level of intensity in this scene. And it's really hard to watch because he's trying so hard to beat this guy and nothing is working. And again, another favorite part is when he goes onto the lower walkway and Batman goes, "Ah!" He's so frustrated. He's just like, "Ah! And it's stuff like this when Bane's got Batman by the throat holding him up, and then he punches him in the stomach so many times. Ugh. And when he punches him by breaking his mask, youch. And as it turns out, he built a secret underground complex underneath the R&D department of Wayne Enterprises. And then it leads to the recreation of the famous image from Nightfall, which is what this movie took some inspiration from.
Oh, your money!
Eesh. That part has always made me cringe. I looked away when I first saw this because I couldn't look. And when I watch it now, I kind of look away, but at the same time I still look at it. It's... ugh. When I saw this with my sister, she's sitting there like this, and she's really weird with movies. I don't know. But when that happened, she freaked the heck out. She went, ah! And then afterwards, Selina tries to leave Gotham City, realizing what she's done and seeing what Bane is capable of. But John Blake catches up with her at the airport and questions her about her kidnapping the congressman from earlier on, and also questions her on where Bruce Wayne is. And this is the one part where I think, wait. I think you could have added another line in there. He says to her, I was at Bruce Wayne's house looking for him. They kill him? She goes, I don't know. It's like, wait. Couldn't you have added something like where she says, you know his secret? I goes, yeah. Did they kill him? It's a nitpick, but still, it's like, you could have added another line or two in there. But then the next scene shows up where Bane has taken Bruce Wayne to the prison pit that he grew up in. And he talks about what his plan is for Gotham City and what his plan is for Bruce Wayne. And how he wants to make the city of Gotham believe that they can survive and pull themselves out of the darkness and all that stuff, similar to how he felt growing up in the prison. And since Bane grew up in this prison, he never really had much value in human life, as it's revealed to be later on with the young Talia. And as opposed to Bruce Wayne, he wants everyone to feel his pain. He wants to project his torment onto other people, and Bruce Wayne. Killing Bruce Wayne will not be enough for Bane. He wants to break his spirit, having him watch his city crumble and right in front of his eyes. By watching it on TV, but you get what I mean. And then we cut back to the city of Gotham, where Bane is basically holding the entire board of directors of Wayne Enterprise hostage in order to gain access to the nuclear reactor. And Miranda Tate agrees to turn it on in order to spare Lucius Fox's life, and the lives of the rest of the Wayne board. And with Dr. Pavel's help, they're able to arm the reactor by disconnecting it from its power supply, which we learn gradually decreases over time, and its power wears out, and it becomes unstable, and it'll blow up within like a 5-month time span, unless it's reconnected to the reactor. Meanwhile, John Blake has continued to investigate Bane's rumblings underground, and once he discovers an even deeper sinister threat, Gordon orders the entire police department to go underneath the city, in the sewers and the subway, to smoke him out. And John Blake discovers, as he interrogates one of these cement workers that he saw outside the stock exchange, Bane has got bombs planted all over the city, buried in motor oil. And during a football game going on between the Gotham Rogues and Rapid City whatever, the whole football field explodes and only one football player survives. And for football fans out there, I'm not a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, I'm an Eagles fan, so nevertheless, I thought it was cool how the Pittsburgh Steelers made a cameo appearance in here, and Bill Cowher, their former coach, shows up in this scene. If you know who Bill Cowher is, you'll be able to spot him. But the bombs go off, not just at the football stadium, but it also kills the mayor in his VIP seat, and bombs explode all over the city, and the bridges get destroyed. The whole city is cut off from the rest of the world, and this whole scene is just like, holy cow. And Bane comes out on the football field and announces to the world what his plan will be. And then he kills Dr. Pavel in front of the entire stadium. And a curfew is enforced throughout Gotham City. And actually one bridge is left undestroyed in order for supplies to come in. So the US Army shows up and tries to negotiate with Bane's head honcho. If one person tries to cross this bridge, all of Gotham is blown to hell. And then later on, Bane reveals in the note that he managed to get out of Commissioner Gordon's jacket when he had him down in the sewers, reveals to Gotham City that Harvey Dent was indeed a murderer, and that Batman took the fall.
I praise the man who tried to murder my own child. And do you accept this man's resignation?
And do you accept the resignation of all of these liars? Of all the corrupt?
And John Blake overhears this, and everybody in the prison that was put behind bars because of the Dent Act that was enforced, understandably, they're upset. and they all burst out of the prison, including Selena Kyle, who was thrown in there, and they start ransacking all these rich people's homes, along with some lower class citizens in Gotham City as well. I'll talk about that in a minute, but John Blake basically is the poster child for the Gotham City feeling angry about Commissioner Gordon's decision to hide the truth from them. Now, obviously, you understand Gordon's reasons for doing this, because Gotham needed a hero, and had they revealed the truth, the Joker would have won, and basically he ended up winning anyway. And even though the Joker is not mentioned in here by name, and I understand why they did it out of respect to Heath Ledger, the effects of his actions are still being felt in this movie, and he's clearly messed some people up here and in here, including Bruce Wayne. And John Blake, being the idealist that he is, expresses disgust over Commissioner Gordon hiding in the truth. And he tells him, "You might find yourself in my position, and one day I hope you have a friend like I did." Which I think further hints at the possible partnership that might have happened after this film's events. But we'll talk about that later. Now, speaking of lower class citizens ransacking rich people's homes, this is something that has been debated about in the last couple years. At the time of this movie's release, this was seen as a commentary on the Occupy Wall Street movement. It's that class warfare thing you've seen a million times in other films and so on, and it's been going on throughout civilization ever since the dawn of humanity. A lot of people at the time thought that Chris Nolan was negating the Occupy Wall Street movement, but he said in interviews that no, we're not putting them down, we're not necessarily supporting it, but we're not against them either. Now, I think what Nolan was trying to say here in this film is that to the Occupy Wall Street movement, look, I understand where you guys are coming from. I feel your pain. You have every right to fight for what you want, but beware of your actions. Don't take it to this level. Don't become the people that you're fighting against. And that's exactly what some of the citizens in Gotham City do in this film. It shows what could happen if you feel angry at the upper class citizens and you take that anger too far, which is another thing that this film is also very reminiscent of the French Revolution. You see Jonathan Crane return, played by Cillian Murphy, passing judgment on these people saying, "Sold! The man with a cold sweat." From what I understand, that's basically what happened during the Revolution a lot of the time. Like, in the name of the people, we will take back what's rightfully ours, and all kinds of atrocities were committed during that time. But another YouTuber pointed this out. I'm not going to say who, but he basically said that this backtracked Gotham City's progression, that now they're just basically idiots, since they learned from the Joker's demands to not go to that level. Well, honestly, not all of the citizens were in on Bane's plan. It's basically like saying every single German was supporting Hitler. That wasn't the case before and during World War II. Not every German believed in Hitler's ideas. And last time I checked, Gotham City police officers count as citizens of their city. And as we see later on at the climax, John Blake has these other kids going around warning people that the bomb's gonna go off. And after the bomb goes off, people start to come out and they start to feel relieved now that the threat has been eliminated. But also, wouldn't some people be angry over the fact that they've been lied to for the last 8 years? To say that they wouldn't be, that shows a little bit of naivete, I would say. And then there's also the question, well, how come Gotham City believed Bane? Well, Commissioner Gordon never came out and denied it, so they probably were thinking, well, if he's not denying it, then it must be true.